Hi everybody, happy Wu Yi holiday. Now today I thought maybe we all need a bit of cheering up, so I'm going to talk about something a bit less serious, and it's going to be humour. Specifically, what is British humour? What defines British humour? Now, humour is actually very culturally linked. So by understanding British humour, you can actually understand British people. So I'm going to go through 5 things that I think define British humour and give you some examples. If you're interested, you can check them out. And I think the first and most important is that British humour generally is not optimistic. British people kind of see the dark side of things, if I'm very honest, and a lot of our humour is not necessarily involving the nicest people, and it's not always involving the nicest situations. 2 series spring to mind, one called The Office by Ricky Gervais and the other is Alan Partridge. Both of these involve very unpleasant people and not particularly optimistic scenarios, and yet are very popular and regarded as very funny by British people. If you contrast that with American humour, tends to be a lot more upbeat, tends to be a lot more positive, tends to be a lot more optimistic about the future. And so The Office was a programme that was also reproduced in America, and from season 2 onwards it deviated from the British script and became a lot more basically happy and was very successful in America, and a very clear example of the differences in humour even between the US and the UK. The second example, or 特点 of British humour, is self-deprecation. Self-deprecation is where you make yourself the subject of the joke. You make fun of yourself. Now, British people in general value modesty very highly as a trait. In, say, again, the US, talking about one's achievements or how good one is generally more accepted than it would be in the UK. And indeed, the UK and people from the UK have a good love of the underdog. They like to support the loser. And therefore, self-deprecating humour, where you make fun of yourself, is something that British people really enjoy. And here's a clip from a guy called Jack Whitehall, who uses this a lot in his humour, and actually is a very archetypal British comic. So if you want to understand any of this, you can look at some of Jack Whitehall's clips.
I mean, it doesn't help that I have the creepiest passport photo that has ever been taken. People looking at me thinking, you've got a bad passport photo, you have not seen anything yet. Brace yourselves for this shit. What is that?
A third big characteristic of British humour is the use of sarcasm. Sarcasm is where you use a set of words which mean something different from what you want them to say. Let me give you an example. It's very common in the UK when it's raining, and let's be honest, it often is, to say when it's raining, oh, isn't it a lovely day today? Clearly you don't mean it's a lovely day. You're using the opposite framing, the opposite meaning in order to have some humour. And this is used very frequently, but what is perhaps the most recognisable part of British humour is sarcasm delivered what we call deadpan. By deadpan I mean as if it's real, as if it's serious. And the best bit of British sarcasm is where you can't really tell whether the person delivering is joking or not. Now, there are examples of sarcasm, of course, in things like US humour. Perhaps people will have seen Friends. Chandler Bing is an example of someone who uses sarcasm a lot. But as I said, British sarcasm is more straight than that. It's played a lot more straight. And a very good example of this is Blackadder. Blackadder is a very famous British comedy show, and the lead actor, Rowan Atkinson, who you may know as Mr. Bean, but in the UK is probably more commonly known as Blackadder, uses sarcasm extensively and to great effect, as in this clip. Penultimately, gallows humour. British people love gallows humour. Now, gallows is basically a structure whereby you used to hang people. So gallows humour basically means making a joke even when the situation is very, very desperate. And British people do kind of enjoy that kind of humour. I'll give you an example actually from a book this time rather than a comedian. And the book is a very famous one called A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Scott Adams. Listen to the following and see how they make humour out of a very dire situation. "So this is it," said Arthur. "We're going to die." "Yes," said Ford, "except no, wait a minute." He suddenly lunged across the chamber at something behind Arthur's line of vision. "What's this switch?" he cried. "What? Where?" cried Arthur, twisting round. "No, I was only fooling," said Ford. "We are going to die after all." The final big feature of British humour is called puns. Puns is where you exploit the fact that words or sentences can have multiple possible meanings. And actually, very typically, this is used in the British tabloid press. What's the tabloid press? Well, it's not stuff like the Financial Times. Really, it's 八卦新闻, that kind of newspaper. But in order to attract readers, they do tend to use quite clever headlines. And actually, the most famous example of this is a tabloid newspaper called The Sun. Let me show you some examples of some of their famous witty headlines. Now, actually, puns are probably one of the most difficult forms of humour to get because they require pretty deep cultural and English understanding. So let me know down below in the comments, how many of those did you understand? Okay, that's it. These are the things that I think most define British humour. If you're interested in learning more, check out any of the people I've mentioned in this. These are some of my favourite comedians at least. Of course, there are many, many more. And if you like British humour, again, let me know. And why don't you also let me know what you think are the 特点 of Chinese humour, something that I myself also try and practice my Chinese with.